There is a thought experiment that Derek Parfit returned to again and again throughout his life. It begins simply. Imagine you step into a machine. The machine scans every atom of your body, the precise electrical state of every neuron, the position of every cell, the exact chemical composition of your blood, and transmits that information across a distance. At the other end, a second machine uses that information to reconstruct you, atom by atom, from new matter. You step in on one side, you step out on the other. The question is not whether this technology will ever exist. The question is, did you survive the journey? Most people answer yes, without hesitation. The person who steps out has your memories, your face, your thoughts, your loves and fears and half-finished ideas. If anything constitutes you, surely that collection does. But Parfit pressed further. What if, during the transmission, the original was not destroyed? What if you stepped in, the scan was made, and you stepped back out again, unchanged, standing in the original machine, and simultaneously an identical copy of you emerged at the other end? Now which one is you? Both of them, remember, being you. Both have equal claim to your history, your relationships, your name. There is no physical fact, no metaphysical fact, no spiritual fact that could decide the question. And if there is no fact that can decide, then perhaps the question itself is malformed. Perhaps the word you is not the kind of thing we thought it was. This is where Derek Parfit began. Derek Parfit was born in China in 1942, the son of two doctors who had traveled to remote communities to document populations affected by smallpox. He grew up in Oxford, the city to which he would eventually return and remain for most of his intellectual life, as a Fellow of All Souls College, one of the most unusual institutions in the world. A college with no undergraduates, no teaching obligations, sustained entirely by endowment and centuries of quiet tradition, designed to allow serious thinking to happen without interruption. He was, by all accounts, an unusual person in the precise way that certain philosophers are unusual, not dramatically unusual, quietly unusual. He ate the same simple meals, repeatedly. He worked through the night and begrudged every hour spent sleeping. He took thousands of photographs across his lifetime, of Venetian palazzos and Russian Orthodox churches, returning to the same facades year after year, trying to capture something in the quality of light that he felt language could not adequately reach. The photographs are striking, still, and melancholic, somehow concerned with exactly what his philosophy was concerned with, what persists, what passes, and what we should make of the difference. His masterwork, Reasons and Persons, was published in 1984. It had been delayed for years, partly by perfectionism, partly by his sense that the book needed to be right before it could be released into the world. It moved through the discipline of philosophy slowly, the way geological forces move, not with the speed of a storm, but with a pressure that reshapes the landscape permanently. The book addressed three enormous questions. What makes actions right or wrong? What makes it rational to act in one's own interests? And what makes a person the same person over time? The third question is where we will spend our time. To understand what Parfit was doing, you need first to understand what he was arguing against. For most of Western philosophy, and for most ordinary human intuition, personal identity is taken to be a deep, determinate fact. There is a fact about whether the person waking up tomorrow is the same person who went to sleep tonight. There is a fact about whether someone who emerged from a coma 20 years later is still the person who entered it. There is a fact about whether you, reading or listening to this now, are the same entity who existed as a child. This view, which Parfit called the non-reductionist view, treats persons as something over and above their physical and psychological states, something that persists. Something that can be tracked through time the way you might track a particular stone or a particular planet. There are different versions of this position. Religious traditions often grounded in the soul, a non-material substance that carries identity intact through time and perhaps beyond death. Secular versions of the idea are harder to pin down, but the intuition is the same, somewhere beneath the constantly changing body, beneath the shifting memories and evolving personality, there is a persisting core. A self, a you. Parfit was not the first to question this. David Hume, writing in the 18th century, had performed a kind of introspective experiment and reported what he found. When he looked inward for the self, the entity that was supposedly having all his experiences, he did not find one. He found a bundle of perceptions, thoughts, feelings, sensations, following one another in rapid succession, no stable observer, no fixed point, just the stream. Parfit took Hume's insight and extended it with the careful, precise tools of analytic philosophy through hundreds of thought experiments, constructed with a patience that itself felt philosophical. His position was what he called the reductionist view. Persons, he argued, are not separately existing entities. They are not souls, not metaphysical substances, not some additional ingredient mixed into the matter and the mind. A person just is a body, and the psychological states that body instantiates across time. There is nothing more to personal identity than physical and psychological continuity. And crucially, psychological continuity comes in degrees. It can be strong or weak. It can be direct or indirect. And it can branch. This last feature, that continuity can branch, is what makes the teleporter case so philosophically sharp. When you step into the teleporter, the question Parfit presses is, what exactly is it you hope survives? Your body, reconstructed from new matter, has exactly the same physical structure. Your mind, reinstantiated from the scan, contains exactly the same psychological contents. Every connection that makes you you is preserved. But the original atoms are gone. Does that matter? And if it does, why? The atoms themselves have no stake in your survival. They were never yours, in any deep sense. Your body replaces most of its constituent atoms over years and decades. The matter that composed you at age 7 is largely absent by age 40. Yet we do not say you died at 8 and were replaced by a copy. We say you persisted. We say you are continuous with the child in the old photographs, even though the material substrate has almost entirely turned over. What is doing that work? What allows us to say one person continues across time? Parfit's answer: psychological continuity. Overlapping chains of memory, intention, belief, and personality, connecting earlier and later stages of a life into a recognizable thread. And nothing more. The fission case presses the argument further still. Suppose your brain is divided in two, both hemispheres intact, but separated, each transplanted into a different body. Both recipients wake up with memories of being you, rich and detailed and equal in their claim. Both have equal access to your psychological history. The non-reductionist is now in serious difficulty. He must say, one of them is you, the other is a mere copy. But there is no way to determine which. There is nothing that could distinguish them. The reductionist offers a different account. Neither of them is fully you, because the word you was always picking out a pattern of psychological continuity, and that pattern has now divided into two distinct streams. There are two people, each with equal claim on the history that once belonged to a single person, and the singular word you no longer picks out a single referent. This might sound like a loss, the dissolution of something important. But Parfit insisted it was the opposite. He wrote, near the end of that section of Reasons and Persons, something that has stayed with many of his readers for the rest of their lives. He wrote, "My life seemed like a glass tunnel, through which I was moving faster every year, and at the end of which there was darkness. When I changed my view, the walls of my glass tunnel disappeared. I seemed to have escaped from a prison." What he meant was this: when we believe that personal identity is a deep, determinate fact, when we believe there is something it truly means to be the same person over time, some metaphysical thread running through all the change, we carry an enormous weight. The weight of a self that must be protected and preserved across time, the weight of future suffering that is indisputably mine and must therefore be feared as if it were present. The weight of past selves I must maintain coherence with, justify, and weave into a continuous narrative. But if personal identity is not a deep fact, if it is a matter of degree, of overlapping connections, of continuity without any further metaphysical glue binding it together, then the walls of the self become thinner, more permeable. The boundary between me and the future person who shares my memories is not a hard line, but a gradient. And while the boundary between me and other people remains real in important practical senses, we do not share bodies, we do not share memories. It is no longer grounded in some profound metaphysical difference between kinds of things. It is a difference of degree, not of kind. This, Parfit believed, had serious moral significance. If the self is less foundational than we assumed, then the rational privilege of self-interest becomes harder to justify. The standard assumption of practical reason is that I have special reason to care about my own future welfare. Not merely that my future welfare matters, it does, as does everyone's, but that it matters to me in a distinctive way, because it is mine. Because future me is me. But if the connection between present me and future me is a matter of psychological continuity that comes in degrees, if the links binding me now to myself in 40 years are similar in nature, though perhaps not always in strength, to the links binding me to people I am close to, then the absolute rational privilege of self-interest starts to look less like a deep metaphysical truth and more like an evolved disposition. Useful, understandable, probably necessary for survival, but not something that reason, followed carefully, must endorse without qualification. And if that is right, then the demand of moral impartiality, the idea that other people's suffering matters as much as one's own, is not something that runs against the grain of reason. It is what reason, followed honestly to its conclusion, arrives at. There is also what this view does to death. Much of the terror of death is the terror of non-existence. The thought that there will come a moment after which there is no experience, no continuation, no me. This terror depends on a particular self-conception, the notion of a persistent, unified entity that will one day simply stop, the image of the glass tunnel ending in darkness. But if personal identity is already impermanent, if the me of this moment is already, in the relevant senses, a different configuration than the me of 20 years ago, then death is not a sudden plunge from solid existence into nothing. It is a further step along a process of change that has been occurring all along. The stream does not end any differently for recognizing that it was always changing. This is not consolation in any cheap sense. The stream still ends. The ending is still real, but it is a different relationship to the ending, one in which the self that was supposed to be lost is recognized as having always been a less fixed thing than the fear of loss assumed. Then there is what Parfit called the non-identity problem. It is, in some ways, the most practically urgent of his contributions, because it reaches forward into the choices we make now and the people those choices will bring into being. Consider a government choosing between two long-term energy policies. One is sustainable and careful, preserving resources across centuries. The other depletes those resources rapidly, leaving conditions substantially worse for people living 200 years from now. We might say, naturally, that the second policy harms the people who will live in that diminished future. But here is the problem. The specific people living in that diminished future would not have existed if the first policy had been chosen. The identity of every person alive 2 centuries from now depends on the entire causal chain of events between now and then. Different policies lead to different meetings, different relationships, different children born at different times. Every choice ripples forward through the network of human lives, producing different people at every step. The people living under worse conditions in 2 centuries would not have existed under better conditions. So in what sense have we harmed them? In the ordinary philosophical sense, harm requires a victim who would have been better off if things had gone differently. These people would not have been alive. If things had gone differently, they would not have existed at all. Parfit did not think this meant we had no obligations to future generations. He thought it meant our standard moral frameworks, built around harm, around identifiable victims, around the comparison between how someone's life went and how it could have gone, were inadequate to ground those obligations. They could not reach across the gap of non-existence, and so he spent years trying to develop a framework that could. One that could explain the wrongness of choices that damage the future, even when no specific identifiable person can be named as the victim who would have been better off. The related problem he identified, which he called the repugnant conclusion, concerns the ethics of bringing people into existence at all. Simple utilitarian calculations suggest that a world containing vast numbers of people whose lives are barely worth living might, in aggregate, contain more total well-being than a smaller world of people living flourishing lives. Most moral intuitions rebel against this conclusion. Parfit shared the intuition completely. He spent decades constructing theories that could honor it without collapsing into inconsistency. He did not succeed, not fully, and he said so honestly. The problem remains open. Derek Parfit died in January 2017, at the age of 74. He had spent 30 years working on a sequel to Reasons and Persons, eventually completing 2 volumes under the title On What Matters. He finished his final revisions only weeks before he died. He worked to the end. There is something that certain philosophers do which looks, from the outside, like a retreat from the world, a stepping back into abstraction, away from the things that matter. But it is not a retreat. It is the opposite. It is a decision to look at something that everyone assumes they already understand, and to actually look at it, directly, without the protection of assumption, without the comfort of familiarity. Personal identity is one of those things. The sense of a continuous, persisting you, moving through time, accumulating a history, building toward something, is among the most immediate of all human experiences. It does not feel like a theory. It feels like the floor beneath your feet, like gravity, like the precondition for everything else. Parfit looked at it directly for decades, with the same patient attention he brought to the light falling across Venetian stone in the late afternoon. And what he found was that the floor was there, but it was not as solid as it appeared. The continuity was real. The connections were real. The memory, the experience, the suffering and the hope, all of it real. But the thing doing the persisting was not a substance, not a soul, not something carved from different material than the rest of the world. It was a pattern, an ongoing, intricate, improbable pattern, arising from matter, sustained by memory and biology, meaningful in its own terms and temporary. The universe does not know your name. It has no record of the particular thread of continuity you call yourself. What it contains is matter, and among that matter, for a brief interval, a configuration that reflects on its own reflection. That is not nothing. It is, in fact, extraordinary. But it is not what most of us assumed when we said the word I. What Parfit offers is not comfort, exactly. It is precision. And for those who can hold it, precision about the hardest things is its own kind of grace.